Fog turns a ferry into a moving rumor. It muffles the horn until it sounds tired. It eats the shoreline so the dock lights become floating dots with no context. It makes distance feel fake. It makes people talk softer without realizing it, like they're in a church, even though it's just wet air and diesel and a schedule that refuses to admit the day is strange. That morning, the crossing was supposed to be routine, the kind of crossing that doesn't earn anyone a story. Commuters in dark coats, weekend travelers with tote bags, a couple of contractors hauling tool cases, a few tourists excited about nothing in particular. Then the fog thickened and the whole place, parking lot, ticket booth, the ferry itself, felt like it had been cut out of the world and set down somewhere else. The company delayed the departure. People complained. People scrolled. People made the same jokes everyone makes about fog, like humor could push it back. And somewhere in that gray, Owen Rourke boarded the ferry with a backpack and a paper boarding pass that would end up in the wrong place, dry as if the sea had never touched it. Owen was not a dramatic person. He was 29 and had that quiet, practical look of someone who solves problems for a living and doesn't want applause for it. He worked in logistics for a regional shipping firm inland, and a few times a month he traveled to the coast to check on a subcontractor's warehouse, routine audits, inventory discrepancies, the kind of work that requires patience, not heroism. His sister May used to tease him that he had the most boring job title possible and somehow made it sound like a mission. Owen would shrug and smile like it didn't matter. He wasn't trying to be interesting. He just wanted life to stay orderly. If something could be planned, he planned it. If something could be double-checked, he double-checked it. That morning, he followed his usual pattern, parked in the same section of the lot, checked the time, checked his phone, adjusted the strap of his backpack, took a last sip of coffee and tossed the cup. He texted May while standing in line. On the ferry. Fog is wild. I'll call after I land. May replied with a quick joke about him being swallowed by the ocean. Owen sent a small, laughing reaction and put his phone away. It was normal. It was nothing. Later, May would replay that exchange like a prayer, looking for a hidden warning inside it, but there wasn't one. The last normal text always looks innocent when it happens. Only later does it harden into something sacred. The boarding process was slow because people moved carefully on the damp ramp. The scanner beeped when Owen's pass was read. He took the thin paper slip, folded it once, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Not because he needed it, but because he hated leaving loose things in his hands. He walked onto the passenger deck, found a seat near the side, and placed his backpack at his feet. He didn't buy coffee. He didn't browse the little display of snacks. He didn't stand at the window for a view that wasn't there. He did what quiet people do when they're in public. He made himself small and waited. The ferry horn sounded low and heavy, and the vessel eased away from the dock. Shoreline lights blurred into nothing. For a moment there was only a gray wall, and the sense of motion came from sound more than sight. Engine vibration, water slap, a metal creak that sounded like the ship settling into its own bones. Inside the passenger cabin, the air smelled like damp coats and cleaning solution. A child watched something on a tablet with the volume too high until a parent lowered it. Someone laughed softly at a message. A couple argued under their breath about whether they'd miss a reservation. Owen sat still. He checked his phone once, then again. Not frantic, just timed, like he was waiting for an update from the warehouse supervisor. Or maybe he was waiting for confirmation that his day would remain normal. About halfway into the crossing, Owen stood. It wasn't abrupt. No one gasped. Movement on a ferry happens all the time. People go to the restroom. People stretch. People step outside for air even when there's nothing to see. Owen picked up his backpack, slung it over one shoulder, and walked toward the rear of the passenger deck. He passed the restroom door and the stairwell down to the vehicle deck. He paused briefly as if deciding, then continued to the rear exit door that led to the outside walkway. A security camera covered that door. On later review, investigators would watch the footage until they hated it. They would zoom and sharpen and slow it down and still feel like they were watching someone walk into a dream. On camera, Owen pushed the door open and stepped onto the rear deck. Fog swallowed him immediately. The outside looked like blank paper. The railing was wet, reflecting faint light. Owen placed one hand on the metal as if grounding himself. He turned his head slightly, scanning the gray, maybe looking for the shoreline, maybe looking for nothing at all. Then he moved toward the corner of the deck and disappeared out of the camera's frame. The rear door did not open again for a while, and when it did, the figure coming through was not clearly Owen, just a dark shape. A hood? A shoulder? Hard to tell in that smeared, damp light. That detail would become important later. At the time, nobody noticed it because nobody was looking. The ferry was still moving. People were still scrolling. The crew was still doing crew things. The crossing ended the way it always did. The ferry docked. The ramp lowered. Passengers filed out. On the far side terminal camera, you could see groups moving in clusters. Families, couples, a line of commuters walking with that quick, practiced pace. Owen wasn't among them. But again, nobody counted him. Nobody checked the seat where he'd been. Nobody asked if the quiet guy with the backpack had gotten off. The ferry turned around for the return crossing. Owen's sister May sat at home, waiting for the call he'd promised. She didn't get it. At first, she didn't worry, because she had trained herself not to worry about every delay. Owen traveled for work. Owen got busy. Owen was sometimes the kind of person who forgot that other people needed small signals to stay calm. But by the time the afternoon blurred into evening, May's patience started to feel like denial. She texted him a simple question. "You land okay?" No reply. She called. The phone rang, then went to voicemail. She tried again later. Same. May's worry wasn't the dramatic kind. It was the precise kind. The worry of someone who knows a person's patterns and knows when the pattern breaks. Owen didn't ignore her. He didn't forget his phone. He didn't stay somewhere without sending a short update. May called the ferry company customer service line first because it was the only place that made sense. Her logic was tight, almost clinical. If he boarded, they must have a record. If he got off, someone must have seen him. The representative sounded polite at first, then uneasy as the details came together. Owen's boarding pass had been scanned, so he had boarded. The terminal cameras on the far side did not show him leaving with the main crowd. The representative put May on hold. A supervisor came on, voice cautious, and said they were going to check the vessel. May asked what that meant. The supervisor said carefully that they could not locate him on board. May's stomach did something cold. "You left with him," she said. and you arrived without him. The supervisor didn't confirm it in those words, but the silence did. Harbor police were notified. The Coast Guard was notified. The ferry was held for inspection. Crew members were questioned. Passengers from the morning crossing were contacted, asked if they'd seen anything unusual, if they'd noticed anyone on the deck, if they'd heard shouting. But fog does something cruel in investigations. It gives you plausible emptiness. If Owen had fallen overboard, the fog could explain why no one saw it. If someone had done something to him, the fog could explain why no one saw that either. In the first days, the working theory was the simplest. Accident. Owen stepped outside, slipped on the wet deck, fell into the water. It was clean, it was tidy, it required no villain, but May couldn't accept it, not because she wanted a villain, but because the facts didn't match. Owen was careful. He didn't take risks for fun. He didn't wander around a slick deck in thick fog unless something pulled him there, and his backpack was never found. If a person falls into the sea, things float. Something breaks loose. A strap, a zipper, a piece of plastic, a jacket, a shoe. The ocean is chaotic, yes, but it is also honest in its mess. It returns debris. Weeks passed and the sea returned nothing. No backpack, no phone, no jacket, nothing. Detective Lana Kim was assigned as liaison between the harbor police and the ferry company. Kim was the kind of investigator who didn't dramatize. She didn't offer false hope. She didn't soften language to make it easier to hear. May disliked her at first because May wanted someone to say, "We'll bring him back." Kim wouldn't say that. Kim said, "We will find out what happened." It sounded colder. It was also more honest. Kim requested the raw footage from every camera on the vessel. Passenger cabin, stairwells, vehicle deck, access points, side corridors, rear door, and the partial camera that covered the corner of the rear deck at an angle. She built a timeline. Not the public kind with clean timestamps, but the investigator kind. Movement, gaps, overlaps. Owen seated, Owen standing, Owen walking, Owen exiting, then absence. The footage didn't show him again. But when Kim slowed and enhanced the rear deck angle footage, something bothered her. A second shape. Not clearly a person at first glance, because fog smears edges and makes motion look like drifting shadow. But with repeated viewing, Kim saw what her instincts had been whispering. There was movement near the corner after Owen went out of frame. Movement that didn't look like Owen coming back. Someone else was out there. That alone didn't prove a crime. People step outside all the time. But combined with Owen not returning, it sharpened the question from did he fall to was he alone? Kim interviewed crew. A deckhand mentioned seeing a man in a dark jacket on the rear walkway. A cafe worker remembered Owen only because he didn't buy coffee, which sounded ridiculous, and yet in investigations, the ridiculous details are often the hooks you hang truth on. A passenger said the rear door opened and closed twice in quick succession around the time Owen went outside. Another passenger said they thought they heard voices outside, low and muffled, but they weren't sure because engines and fog do strange things to sound. Nothing was a smoking gun. Fog doesn't give you a smoking gun. Fog gives you a wet matchstick and asks you to light it anyway. Kim also checked the far side terminal footage. Owen did not exit through the main passenger ramp. If he didn't exit with everyone, either he never arrived alive or he arrived and left through a non-public route. Non-public routes existed. Service exits for crew. Vehicle deck access points. Maintenance doors. Kim asked for maintenance logs and access records. The ferry company was cooperative, but corporate cooperation has limits. They offered only what was requested, nothing extra, and they wrapped everything in polite language that sounded like legal counsel. Kim kept pushing. One maintenance note caught her attention. Rear service hatch. Latch issue. Not a major issue. Not an alarm. A minor note, filed weeks earlier, that the latch sometimes didn't catch fully. Kim stared at that line longer than she expected. Because a rear service hatch wasn't a passenger door. It was used by crew. It opened into a narrow service passage that connected to storage areas and equipment mounts, including the lifeboat mount. Kim asked who had access to service hatches. Crew, obviously, and contractors. The ferry company used third-party contractors for safety inspections and equipment maintenance, lifeboat checks, emergency gear verification, routine compliance work. Kim requested the list of contractors scheduled around the time of the crossing. There was a name, Eli Mercer. No relation to May, just an unfortunate overlap of a common surname. Eli Mercer was listed as inspection support for life safety equipment, contracted through a third-party compliance vendor. He had been on board that morning. Kim didn't accuse him. She didn't even talk to him yet. She simply noted it. A person with reason to be near the rear deck and lifeboat mounts was present during the crossing when Owen vanished. Meanwhile, May's life narrowed into a tunnel. Work became a blur. Sleep became a joke. Every time her phone rang, her body jolted as if electricity ran through her spine. She stopped making plans more than a day ahead because she was always waiting for the next call from Kim. May also became the face of the story, because that's what happens in missing person cases. The missing becomes a symbol, and the family becomes the voice. Local news ran Owen's photo. A clean headshot, slightly awkward smile, eyes that looked too normal for a mystery. May begged anyone with information to come forward. Some people did. Most of it was useless. A man claimed he saw Owen on a beach weeks later. Wrong person. A woman claimed she received a message from Owen's number. It was spam. An amateur internet investigator insisted Owen staged his disappearance for insurance. May nearly broke her laptop reading it. Kim watched the tips come in and did her best not to let May see how often hope turned into nothing. Weeks became months. The water search was called off because you cannot drag forever. The sea is huge. The budget is not. Public interest faded in the way public interest always fades, because even tragedy has a news cycle. The fog season ended. Sunny days returned. The ferry continued to run. May hated that most of all, that the world kept moving like Owen's disappearance was a temporary interruption. Kim did not close the case, but she shifted it from immediate recovery to investigation. She reviewed the footage again and again. She noticed patterns on the ferry, who moved where, when, how long doors stayed open. She studied the service corridors like a map of possible disappearance routes. She requested phone records and found that Owen's phone stopped transmitting shortly after he stepped outside. That could mean it fell into the water. It could also mean it was powered off. Kim checked for any stray device pings on the ship's Wi-Fi network. Owen had never connected. That wasn't helpful. But a device with a contractor network identifier had connected briefly near the rear equipment area during the crossing. It wasn't proof, but it was odd. Contractors usually didn't connect personal devices to ship networks, and the connection was brief, almost like someone testing reception. Kim flagged it. May kept asking Kim, "Do you think he's alive?" Kim's answer never changed. "I don't know." May began to hate that answer, then began to cling to it. "I don't know" was better than no. It left a crack in the wall where hope could breathe, even if that hope hurt. Then, 6 months after Owen vanished, a storm hit the coast. Not a cinematic apocalypse, just a stubborn storm that pushed waves hard enough to tear old things loose, rearrange sandbars, and spit debris onto beaches that normally stayed clean. 2 days after the storm, a fisherman walking along a rocky stretch of shoreline found something wedged in seaweed. A small lifeboat. Not a full-size rescue craft, but an auxiliary lifeboat from a ferry. The hull was scraped, salt-stained, crusted with barnacles. A line of rope trailed from it like a severed tendon. The fisherman assumed it was junk until he noticed markings consistent with the ferry company's fleet. He called it in. Harbor police arrived. Kim arrived. May arrived after Kim called her, driving as if she could outrun dread. The lifeboat looked wrong on sand, like a piece of the ferry had wandered off and died. Kim circled it slowly. She noted the hull damage, the missing oar hardware, the rope that looked cut rather than frayed by sea wear, the release mechanism that looked like it had been operated, not ripped loose. And then Kim saw something inside. A paper slip, tucked into the corner under a plastic lip. Kim's posture changed. May saw it and felt her throat tighten. Kim reached in carefully and pulled it out. A boarding pass. Thin paper, folded, and dry. That detail was the punch. Not the fact that a boarding pass existed, but that it was dry. No water stains, no salt bloom, no soft fibers. It looked like it had been protected. May stared at it like it was a message from a dead language. Kim unfolded it. Owen Rourke. May felt a strange impulse to laugh, not because it was funny, but because her brain couldn't process how a piece of paper could travel through storm and sea and arrive intact. Kim said quietly, "This confirms he boarded." May's voice came out sharp. "We already knew that." Kim held the pass up slightly and let the light hit it. "This confirms something else," Kim said. May swallowed. "What?" Kim didn't answer immediately. She didn't want to give May a theory and watch it become a new obsession. But logic was standing there unavoidable, like the lifeboat itself. Someone had kept that boarding pass dry. Someone had preserved it. A boarding pass is worthless unless it is meant to be found. It is proof, not treasure. Kim sent the boarding pass to the lab. She ordered a full forensic sweep of the lifeboat. The boat was treated like a crime scene. There were scratches on the interior floor, as if something heavy had been dragged. The rope looked cut. The release pin mechanism showed tool marks. This boat had been removed deliberately, and then set loose. Why? Kim's mind returned to the rear service hatch in the equipment area. If someone wanted to move a person or items without being seen, the lifeboat mount area and service passages were convenient, and fog would cover any movement on deck. Lab results came back. Partial print on the boarding pass, not Owen's. Kim didn't need much more to feel the case shift from possibility to direction. She compared the partial print with known prints of crew and contractors who had access. Most were unavailable in the system, but contractors had records in compliance files. One match came back consistent enough to make Kim's chest tighten. Eli Mercer, the contractor, the man listed as inspection support. Kim didn't announce it publicly. She didn't tell May immediately. She knew what that knowledge would do to May's mind. It would turn the fog into a face. Kim brought Eli Mercer in for a formal interview. He arrived calm, dressed like a man used to inspections and paperwork. He acted mildly offended at the implication he could be involved in anything. He spoke in the steady tone of someone who thinks calmness is innocence. Kim let him talk. She asked routine questions. Where he was on the ferry, what his duties were, what equipment he checked. Eli answered smoothly. Kim placed a photo of the boarding pass on the table. Eli glanced at it and looked away. Kim said, "That was found in an auxiliary lifeboat that washed ashore after the storm." Eli shrugged. Kim said, "It's dry." Eli's expression did something small. Not panic, but awareness, like a person hearing a word they didn't expect. Kim said, "It has your print." Eli's calm thinned. He said he didn't know how that was possible. Kim didn't argue. She simply said, "Explain why your print is on Owen Rourke's boarding pass." Eli's eyes flicked toward the door, then back. Kim asked where he was during the crossing. Eli said he was doing checks. Kim asked which checks. Eli listed them. Kim asked why he would have touched a passenger's boarding pass. Eli said he couldn't explain it. Kim stared at him and did something that felt almost cruel in its simplicity. She stopped talking. Silence is uncomfortable for liars. Truthful people fill it with details. Liars fill it with performance. Eli filled it with performance. Kim ended the interview without accusation. She didn't need a confession yet. She needed leverage. She obtained a warrant for Eli's van and storage unit. The van was clean. Too clean, almost. The kind of clean that isn't, "I'm neat, but I don't want residue." Tools arranged, surfaces wiped, smell of disinfectant. Kim's team found nothing obvious inside the van. Then they searched the storage unit. At first glance, it looked like a contractor's storage. Bins, equipment cases, old manuals. But in a corner, on a shelf, there was a waterproof pouch. Inside that pouch was Owen's phone. Powered off, dry, charged, as if someone had preserved it. Next to it was another pouch with a stack of paper slips. Boarding passes, different names, different crossings. Some folded the same way, some carefully sealed. Not evidence of a single incident, evidence of a pattern. Kim felt the case widen like a rip. Because if Eli had collected boarding passes, he hadn't done it once. May was called in and told they had found Owen's phone. May's relief was immediate and sickening. Relief because it meant Owen existed, somewhere beyond the sea. Sickening because a preserved phone meant someone took it and kept it. People don't preserve phones in the ocean. People preserve phones on land. May asked the question that mattered, voice trembling. "Does this mean he's alive?" Kim didn't promise. She said the only honest thing. "It means there's a chance." May clung to the word chance like it was a rope. Eli was arrested on multiple charges related to unlawful detention and evidence tampering, with the investigation expanding rapidly. Public reaction flared again because stories love a suspect. A suspect gives people something to point at. The ferry company issued a statement about cooperation and safety reviews. The compliance vendor issued a statement about shocked and no prior indications. None of it mattered to May. May wanted one thing: Owen. Kim's team mapped Eli's movements using what they could. Fuel purchases, toll records, phone pings. Eli had been careful, but nobody is perfect. He had visited the coast more often than his job required. He had stops that didn't match work routes. One location appeared repeatedly, a small inlet area with old fishing cabins, the kind of place people rent for quiet weekends. Eli had a cabin, inherited, not widely listed. Kim requested a warrant. The team went early in the morning when the light was pale and the bay looked flat as steel. A thin fog sat over the water, not as thick as the day Owen vanished, but enough to make the world feel familiar. Kim hated that. The cabin looked ordinary from the outside. Weathered wood, a small porch, a boat trailer, nothing that screamed crime. Inside, it smelled like stale air and cheap cleaner. There were canned goods stacked neatly, water jugs, a small folding table, a radio, a mattress in a back room. Kim moved through the cabin methodically, listening. A faint sound came from behind a closed door. Not a scream, not a bang, a shuffle. Kim opened the door. Owen was there, alive. For a moment, Owen stared at the officers as if they were not real. His eyes were too wide, his face too thin, his hair unkempt. He looked like a person who had been held inside a small world and forgot the wider world existed. Kim spoke his name softly, as if volume could fracture him. Owen's mouth opened and nothing came out at first. Then he made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob, the kind of sound a body makes when it doesn't know which emotion it's allowed to feel. May arrived later and saw him and broke, not the dignified way people cry on television, the ugly way. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder and held him like he might disappear again if she loosened her grip. Owen could not speak much at first. His voice was rough from disuse, his mind slow in that exhausted way. But over the following days, with medical staff and investigators handling him carefully, Owen's account began to form into something coherent. He said he went to the rear deck because he felt claustrophobic. Fog and engine noise made him uneasy, and he wanted air, even if that air was wet. He said a man in work gear approached him and asked if he was okay. The man looked like a contractor, safe, belonging. The man gestured toward the corner of the deck, saying the wind was calmer there, away from the door. Owen followed because it sounded reasonable. Fog hid everything. At the corner, the man directed Owen toward a service hatch. The man had a key. He opened it smoothly like it was part of routine. Owen hesitated. Then the man's tone changed. Not loud, not aggressive, just final. Owen was moved through narrow service corridors and into a storage area near the lifeboat mount. The man took Owen's phone and shut it off. The man took the backpack and removed anything that could identify Owen quickly. The man kept calm, like he was checking equipment, not committing a crime. Owen tried to resist. He tried to shout, but engines and fog and metal corridors swallowed sound. The man kept Owen hidden until docking, then moved him off the ferry through a service exit and into a van. No dramatic struggle on the public deck. No scene for cameras. Just a quiet exploitation of access. Owen said the man cared about proof more than Owen expected. Not proof for police, but proof for himself. The man collected boarding passes. He kept them like receipts, like trophies, but also like reminders of control. A piece of paper that said you boarded, and then you vanished. Owen tried to keep his boarding pass as a small anchor to reality, folded in his pocket. At some point it was taken. The man kept it dry. Then months later it was placed in a lifeboat and set loose. Owen believed it was meant to distract, to create a sea story, to make investigators focus on water while Owen was kept on land. That detail chilled Kim more than anything else. Staging. Not just taking someone, but planting a narrative. Because staging isn't just about getting away with it, it's about controlling what everyone believes. Owen stayed in the cabin for months. The man kept him fed enough to survive, kept him isolated, moved him rarely. Owen said the man was obsessed with routine. He liked things orderly. He cleaned constantly. He spoke calmly. He acted like Owen was a problem that could be managed with procedure. That was the most unsettling part for Owen. The man didn't appear crazy in a way Owen could recognize. He appeared methodical. Owen said he thought he would never be found because the world believed he belonged to the sea until the storm. The storm tore loose the staged lifeboat narrative and pushed it onto a beach where a fisherman called police. The storm accidentally rewrote the story. After Owen's rescue, the ferry company did what companies do. New policies, new locks, new camera angles, new vendor oversight. They held press conferences. They promised safety reviews. May didn't care. She cared that Owen could sit in her kitchen again, cup of water in his hands, staring at it like the simplest things had become precious. Owen struggled afterward, not with heroic speeches, but with small triggers. The sound of a ferry horn on television, the sight of fog rolling over a highway, the way damp air felt on his face. He flinched at doors closing behind him. May asked him once if he hated the sea now. Owen shook his head slowly. It wasn't the sea, he said. It was the gray. May didn't understand. Owen tried again. Fog feels like permission. Permission for what? May asked. Owen stared at his hands and said, for people to do things and pretend they didn't. Months later, when Owen was stronger, he asked May to drive him to the terminal. May didn't want to. She feared it would break him, but Owen insisted, and May learned that sometimes confronting a place isn't about bravery. Sometimes it's about refusing to let a location own you. They went on a clear day. Blue sky, sharp shoreline, tourists taking photos, everything normal. Owen stood near the rear deck door on the dockside, not boarding, just standing close enough to feel the ghost of the memory. He watched the crew move. He watched passengers line up. He watched the scanner beep. He looked calm, but May saw the tension in his jaw. Owen said quietly, everyone thinks the danger is the water. May nodded. Owen said, it wasn't. May corrected him softly. It was a person using the water story. Owen exhaled like that distinction mattered. They left without boarding. That was enough for that day. May later asked Kim why the boarding pass was kept dry. Why not toss it? Why keep it at all? Kim's answer was blunt. Because he wanted to control the narrative, Kim said, and because he wanted to keep souvenirs. May said, he wanted to be remembered. Kim nodded once. He wanted to be invisible and remembered at the same time. Those are the worst ones. They want the power of disappearance and the attention of mystery. Owen's case became a warning story, but May hated the phrase warning story because it made it sound like Owen's suffering existed to educate strangers. Still, the story did what stories do. It changed behavior. The ferry upgraded cameras. The terminals restricted contractor access. Service hatch keys were logged. Random audits increased. People began paying attention to who belonged where. Not everyone, but more than before. Owen went back to work eventually in a modified role. He couldn't travel for a while. He hated the idea of being in transit in enclosed spaces. Logistics work, ironically, became difficult because logistics is movement. He also began volunteering quietly with a missing person support group. Not as a public speaker, not as a face on television. Quietly, helping families navigate forms, records requests, the exhaustion of waiting. He told one family something May heard him say only once. Don't let them turn your person into scenery, Owen said. Keep them human. May stood in the doorway and cried silently because she understood. Owen had been turned into a sea story, a fog story, a mystery. What saved him wasn't a heroic chase. It was a small piece of paper that refused to rot, and a storm that delivered it to the wrong beach. A lifeboat washed ashore. Inside was a boarding pass, dry like a message. People argued later about whether the perpetrator intended it as a taunt or a misdirection, whether it was arrogance or strategy. May didn't care about the motive. May cared about the lesson that sat under everything like a hard truth. In fog, the world feels unsupervised, and there are people who treat that feeling like an invitation. Owen survived because an invitation can be intercepted. A storm can change a plan. A fisherman can call. A detective can refuse to accept the neat story. And a sister can keep the missing person from becoming an old headline by calling again and again until someone finally says, not "we don't know," but "we found him."